In the far reaches of the Midwest, past dirt roads that barely showed up on maps, there stood an old farmhouse that everyone in the nearby town knew about but few dared to speak of. It wasn't the farmhouse itself that kept people away. It was the well. The well predated the farm. Old records hinted that even before settlers arrived, the land was avoided by indigenous tribes who called it the Thirsty Mouth. They believed it was a place where spirits lingered, where something below the earth was always waiting. When settlers built the farmhouse and barn in the 1800s, they dug deeper into the well, thinking they had discovered a miracle: clean, cold water that never ran out. But within a year, the first family abandoned the land, leaving behind animals, furniture, and tools. No one ever found out why. Over the next century, at least 6 different families tried to make the farm their home. Each lasted less than 2 years. The pattern was always the same: missing livestock, unexplained noises at night, and stories of pale shapes seen climbing out of the well under moonlight. The last family before the Johnsons even boarded it up, sealing it with heavy planks. Still, within months, the boards had been found pried off, always from the inside. The Johnson family arrived in 1987. Robert Johnson was a practical man, and his wife Anne believed faith could conquer fear. Their daughter, Emily, was 14 and full of the restless curiosity of youth. When the locals warned them about the well, Robert laughed it off. "Water's water. If it never runs dry, we should be grateful." And at first, the well did seem like a blessing. Summers were dry, but their buckets were always full, the water clear and cool. Almost too clear, Emily noticed. It lacked the earthy taste of natural groundwater. It was like drinking melted snow, fresh but strange. The first unsettling event happened in early spring. One morning, Emily found the family dog, Max, cowering near the porch. His fur was soaked, and muddy paw prints trailed from the well all the way to the steps. Robert scolded the dog for wandering out at night, but Emily noticed something odd. Max refused to drink the well water after that. He would whine and back away, even when thirsty. Then came the whispers. Emily swore she heard them first, soft, distant voices when she walked past the well. At night, when she closed her bedroom window, the faint sound of someone calling her name floated through the air. Sometimes it was her mother's voice, sometimes it was Robert's, but when she went to check, they were fast asleep. One night in late June, Emily woke to the sound of footsteps crunching over the gravel outside her window. She peered through the curtain and froze. In the pale wash of moonlight, something was climbing out of the well. It wasn't a person. It was too thin, its limbs impossibly long. Water streamed off its gray, corpse-like skin. Its face was little more than stretched flesh over a skull, its eyes white and milky, but it turned toward the house with unsettling intent. Emily screamed, waking Robert. He grabbed his shotgun and stormed outside, but when he reached the well, nothing was there. Only rippling water disturbed the surface, as though something had just slipped back down into the dark. The days that followed grew stranger. Buckets left beside the well would fill themselves, brimming to the top as if the water rose on its own. Damp footprints, small like those of a child, appeared on the porch in the mornings, always leading back toward the well. At night, a sound like wet hands dragging along the clapboard walls echoed through the farmhouse, leaving long, slimy streaks that Anne scrubbed away each morning in silence. Then came the night Emily nearly died. She was drawing water while Robert mended the fence. As she leaned over the well to dip the bucket, something cold and strong clamped around her wrist and yanked hard. She shrieked, her feet slipping on the stones, and felt herself being dragged toward the darkness below. Robert dropped his tools and sprinted over, grabbing her by the waist. Whatever had her refused to let go until Robert yanked with all his strength. When he pulled her free, Emily's wrist was bruised with perfect finger-shaped marks. But they weren't the size of a man's hand. They were small, delicate, like the hand of a child. That was the breaking point for Robert. He was no longer laughing off local stories. That night, he told Anne he was going down into the well himself. He believed there must be some kind of animal, maybe even a trespasser, hiding in a cavern below. Anne begged him not to, Emily cried, but Robert was stubborn. He lowered himself down the rope with a lantern tied to his belt and his rifle strapped across his back. Anne and Emily held the rope, their knuckles white as it slid deeper and deeper into the dark. For a while, they heard Robert's grunts, his boots scraping stone. Then the rope jerked once, hard. Anne screamed his name. The lantern light flickered far below, then went out. There was silence. Then, the rope began to move on its own, pulling downward with unnatural force. Anne and Emily tried to hold on, but it tore through their hands, leaving blisters and cuts. When the weight suddenly lifted, they pulled frantically, desperate to bring Robert back. But the rope came up wet, frayed and shredded, chewed, it seemed, by dozens of tiny teeth. Robert never came back. Anne and Emily fled the farm that same night. They left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and never returned. The farmhouse stood abandoned for years after. The well, however, remained. Neighbors say it still hasn't gone dry. On quiet nights, those who pass claim they hear Robert's voice echoing faintly from the depths, pleading to be pulled out. The Carter family owned land that everyone in the neighboring town whispered about, but few dared to approach after sunset. From the highway, their farm looked ordinary, a weathered white house, a leaning red barn, and acres of tall, endless cornfields. But anyone who had driven past at night swore the fields didn't look right. The stalks always seemed too tall, too thick, and when the moonlight hit just right, the corn looked almost black. For generations, the Carters had prospered while other farms struggled. During droughts, when neighbors' crops shriveled to dust, the Carter fields remained lush and green. During floods, when the land was drowned in water, their rows stood strong. They never went without. And yet not one Carter ever explained how. When people asked, they just smiled tight and said, "Our land always provides." In the fall of 1993, Robert Carter's son Daniel began helping with the harvest. He was 17, restless, and tired of the whispers about his family. He wanted proof that there was nothing wrong with their farm, that the stories were just gossip. One afternoon, as he worked the fields alone, he sliced his palm on a husk while pulling back an ear of corn. He cursed under his breath and pressed the wound, blood dripping onto the soil. To his shock, the earth seemed to drink it in instantly. The dirt darkened, soaking it greedily, leaving no trace behind. When he shucked the ear of corn, he froze. The kernels weren't golden. They were deep, dark red, the exact color of the blood he had just spilled. That night, Daniel brought the ear into the house, laying it on the table in front of his father. "How do you explain this?" he demanded. Robert's weathered face paled. He muttered something about disease, about fungi that turned plants red, but his hands trembled as he spoke. His wife, Martha, wouldn't even look at the corn. She crossed herself and whispered, "Not again." Daniel's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, not again?" Neither of his parents answered. Robert grabbed the ear and threw it into the fire. The flames hissed, turning black smoke for a moment before settling. The days that followed only grew worse. As Daniel worked, he began noticing more strange things. The soil under certain rows was always damp, even on days with no rain. The air carried a coppery tang, like rust or iron. Sometimes, when he split open an ear, a warm spray of thick red liquid splattered across his hands. It stained his skin and clothes, and no matter how hard he scrubbed, the scent of blood lingered. At night, when the windows were open, Daniel swore he heard voices drifting from the corn. Whispers at first, then clearer. Laughter, weeping, calling his name. Once, he woke to find muddy footprints leading from the back door to the edge of the field. They were small, like those of children, but none of his siblings had left their beds. The harvest moon came at the end of October, and with it came the breaking point. The Carters lit their lanterns and walked into the fields as a family. Daniel carried a sickle, his father a scythe, his mother a basket. The corn towered over them, swaying though there was no wind. The farther they walked, the thicker the air became, heavy with the smell of iron. Daniel swung his sickle at a stalk, but when it fell, the soil beneath gurgled. A dark liquid seeped up, soaking his boots. He raised the lantern, and his heart stopped. The earth was glistening red. Blood. The entire row of corn was feeding on it, their roots pulsing like veins beneath the soil. Daniel staggered back, choking. This isn't possible." Robert placed a hand on his shoulder, eyes shining with something between terror and resignation. "It's the price," he whispered. "It always has been." The ground began to shift beneath them, heaving like the back of some great beast turning in its sleep. The stalks trembled violently, shaking loose husks and leaves. Then came the voices, no longer whispers but screams. Dozens, maybe hundreds of them rising up from beneath the soil. The cries of men, women, children, all shrieking in agony. Faces pressed through the dirt for a fleeting second, mouths open wide in silent wails before being swallowed again. Daniel dropped his lantern and stumbled back, nearly tripping over the roots that now writhed across the ground like living things. "We have to go," Daniel screamed. "We can't stay here." His father shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "This is how we survive, son. This is why our fields never die. If we run from it, the land will take us instead." But Daniel couldn't accept it. He wrenched free of his father's grip and bolted, thrashing through the corn as the field seemed to close in around him. The stalks whipped at his face, their leaves slick with red. Behind him, he heard his family crying out, not in fear, but in prayer, chanting words he didn't recognize. The screams from the earth blended with theirs until it was one deafening, unholy chorus. When he finally broke free into the yard, Daniel collapsed, gasping for air. He turned back once, his stomach twisting. The cornfield writhed as though alive, the rows swaying in rhythm with the earth's heaving. A crimson glow seemed to pulse between the stalks, as if the very soil bled. His father never came back out, neither did his mother. By morning, the field stood tall and calm, glistening with dew. The corn looked golden and healthy, as if nothing had happened. To anyone passing by, the farm appeared prosperous as always. Daniel left that day. He never returned. But the Carters who remained kept farming, year after year, and the harvest never failed. And on nights when the harvest moon rose full and bright, neighbors swore the wind carried faint screams across the fields, as if the land remembered every drop it had taken. The Anders family barn was a landmark in the valley, tall, weather-beaten, with faded red paint that peeled in strips and roof shingles that clung stubbornly against storms. It had stood for nearly 100 years, older than the house itself. Farmers came and went, but the barn remained, towering like a silent witness to everything that happened on the land. By day, it smelled of hay and horses, filled with sunlight that streamed through the slats. But by night, the barn changed. The air grew colder. The animals shifted nervously in their stalls, and the hayloft, the upper floor above the stables, took on a presence that everyone in the family tried not to talk about. Their grandfather, who had raised the barn with his own hands, used to warn them, "Don't climb up there after dark. The loft doesn't belong to us then." When he was alive, no one dared break that rule. But after his death, it became nothing more than an old story told at dinner tables. A superstition, something to laugh about when the lights were on. Until the summer of 1996, when 16-year-old Sarah Anders decided to test it. It was the last week of July, and the heat hung heavy in the air. Cicadas buzzed in the trees, and the horses in the stalls swished their tails restlessly. Sarah and her younger brother Mark had gone out to feed them just after dusk. Their father was mending tools in the shed, their mother cleaning up dinner dishes inside the house. Sarah was shoveling feed when she froze. Above them, faint but distinct, came the sound of footsteps. Not the scurry of mice, not the flutter of birds. These were heavy, deliberate steps shifting across the hayloft floorboards. Mark looked up, wide-eyed. "Someone's up there." Sarah narrowed her eyes. No one should be. She grabbed the lantern from the stall door, its flame flickering in the draft, and started toward the ladder. Mark's voice cracked. "Don't, Grandpa always said..." Sarah cut him off. "Grandpa's stories were just to scare kids." And with that, she climbed. The ladder creaked under her weight, each rung groaning as though protesting her decision. The lantern swung in her hand, throwing shadows that danced across the walls. She hoisted herself onto the hayloft floor, her heart pounding. At first glance, everything looked ordinary. Stacks of hay bales lined the walls. Dust floated in the lamplight. The old wooden floor stretched out in silence. But the air was colder here, thicker. Sarah's skin prickled with goosebumps. She stepped forward, the lantern beam cutting through the dark. Something moved in the far corner. For the briefest moment, she saw it. A figure standing between the hay bales. Tall, thin, face lost in shadow. Its head tilted ever so slightly, like it was studying her. Then it was gone. Her throat tightened. "Hello?" she whispered, though she wasn't sure why. No answer, only silence. She turned toward the ladder and her stomach dropped. It wasn't there. Where the ladder should have been, hay bales were stacked high, blocking the way down. Panic surged through her veins. She rushed forward, shoving at the hay, but her hands passed straight through. The bales weren't real. They dissolved into mist the moment she touched them, reforming when she pulled away. From below, Mark's voice rang out, distant, muffled. "Sarah, the ladder's right here." She spun back to the loft, trembling. The ladder was visible again, but it seemed farther away now, warped by the shadows stretching across the floor. That was when she noticed the shadow. It stretched across the loft floor, long and jagged, as though someone stood behind her, blocking the lantern. But when she whipped around, no one was there. The shadow moved on its own. It crept toward her, growing taller, sharper, its limbs elongating unnaturally. The lantern flame sputtered as though smothered by unseen breath. The shadow leaned across the boards until it touched her feet, and suddenly Sarah couldn't move. She tried to scream, but the sound caught in her throat. She felt pressure on her chest, like something invisible was leaning on her, pinning her down. The air grew icy, each breath painful, sharp. From below, Mark's voice grew frantic. "Sarah, jump, jump now!" With every ounce of strength she had, Sarah hurled herself off the loft. She hit the ground hard, pain exploding in her leg as she landed near the stalls. Mark grabbed her by the arm and pulled her toward the house, his face pale with terror. Their father burst in with a lantern, demanding answers. When he climbed the ladder to the loft, everything appeared normal. The ladder was steady, the hay bales stacked, but the floorboards told a different story. Charred black marks scorched the wood, forming a perfect circle in the center of the loft. The air smelled faintly of smoke and sulfur. Sarah sobbed as her father carried her out. She refused to set foot in the barn again. Years later, when the Anders family sold the farm, the new owners began renovations. They tore up the old hayloft boards, hoping to replace the rotted planks. What they found made them abandon the project entirely. The underside of the boards was covered in handprints, dozens of them, charred into the wood as though burned in from below. The prints were twisted, stretched, some small like children's, others impossibly large, and all of them pointed upward, toward the loft. The miller's farm sat on the edge of town, a patchwork of corn, wheat, and rolling pasture land that had been in the family for nearly 3 generations. But the heart of that farm was not the land itself. It was the old tractor. It was a hulking machine, painted green, though most of the color had long since flaked away to reveal dull steel beneath. Its tires were worn but unyielding, its engine louder than thunder when it turned over. It had been purchased in the 1940s by Henry Miller, the family patriarch, and for as long as anyone remembered, it had never broken down. While other farmers replaced their equipment every decade or so, Henry's tractor kept working. Through drought, flood, and storm, it pulled loads twice as heavy as its frame should have allowed. Built to last forever, Henry always said. But as time passed, neighbors whispered a different truth. Nothing built by human hands lasts forever, unless something else keeps it alive. Henry died in 1991. His son William inherited the farm, though he never cared much for the old tractor. He often joked about selling it to a collector or scrapping it entirely. Still, he never did. Deep down, he admitted to his daughter Claire that it unnerved him. "Some things," he muttered once, "just don't let go." Claire was 16 then, sharp-eyed and skeptical, raised on her father's realism rather than Henry's folklore. She had heard the neighbors gossip, that people sometimes heard the tractor running in the dead of night, its engine working the fields long after Henry had gone to bed. She rolled her eyes at the stories, until one summer evening she saw it herself. It was near dusk, the horizon painted orange as the last of the sunlight bled away. Claire sat on the porch, fanning herself against the sticky July air. The farm was still, cicadas buzzing in the trees. Then she heard it, the low guttural rumble of the tractor's engine. Her father had gone into town. The keys hung by the back door. Yet across the darkening field she saw the machine moving. Slowly, steadily, the tractor crawled between the rows of corn, its headlights glowing dimly, sweeping across the stalks like watchful eyes. Claire leaned forward, squinting. The driver's seat was empty. Her breath caught. She ran inside, grabbed the keys, and bolted for the barn. But the moment she stepped into the yard, the engine cut off. The tractor sat silent at the edge of the field, its headlights dead, its seat empty. That night, Claire told her father. His face drained of color. He didn't ask her to repeat herself, didn't laugh it off, didn't tell her she'd imagined it. Instead, he muttered, "I knew it would start again." "Start what again?" Claire pressed. But William wouldn't explain. All he told her was simple and chilling. "Stay away from it at night, no matter what you hear." The warnings didn't stop the tractor. For the rest of that summer, Claire woke again and again to the sound of its engine outside. Sometimes it worked the fields in the moonlight, tracing perfect rows across the corn without a hand on the wheel. Other nights, it circled the barn, wheels grinding as though wearing a path into the earth. And sometimes, It simply sat idling in the yard, its headlights glowing faintly, pointed straight at the house. One morning, Claire found tire tracks pressed deep into the mud, tracks that led from the fields all the way to the porch steps, stopping just inches from the door. By late August, the tension in the Miller house was unbearable. William drank more, slept less. He kept the shotgun by his bed. Then came the storm. It was a violent night, lightning tearing the sky open, rain lashing the roof. Claire tossed restlessly in bed until the sound reached her. The tractor's engine, louder than ever before, rumbling as if in fury. She rushed to the window and froze. The tractor was barreling across the field, tearing rows of corn from the ground. Its headlights flared blindingly, locked onto the house. "Dad!" Claire screamed. William stormed outside, shotgun in hand, rain soaking his clothes. The tractor roared closer, its wheels digging trenches into the mud. At the last second, it stopped. Just yards from the porch, the engine sputtered, then died. William climbed onto the machine, lantern in hand. His face went pale. The ignition was cold. The seat was wet, soaked with mud, and the keys were still hanging by the back door. The next morning, William told Claire the truth. Decades earlier, when Henry was a young man, he'd hired a drifter named Thomas to help with the harvest. Thomas was strong, eager, but he and Henry had argued constantly. One night, while working late in the fields, Thomas disappeared. Henry told everyone it had been an accident, that Thomas slipped beneath the tractor's wheels, but no body was ever found. No funeral was ever held. Rumors spread that Henry had buried the truth as deeply as he buried the man. And soon after, the tractor began to change. "It's him," William said flatly. "It's Thomas. He never left." That night, Claire lay awake long after the lamps had gone out. Every creak of the house made her flinch. At midnight, the engine started again. This time it wasn't in the field. It was just beneath her window. The headlights stayed dark, but she could see the faint outline of the machine in the moonlight. And worse, she could see the driver's seat. A figure slumped there, shoulders hunched, mud dripping from its clothes. Its hands gripped the wheel with skeletal fingers. Slowly, its head lifted, and two pale, milky eyes met hers through the glass. The engine roared, rattling the panes. Claire screamed, and her father burst into the room, dragging her away. When they dared look again, the tractor was gone. Only deep tire tracks remained, circling the house like a predator pacing its prey. The Millers never sold the farm. They still work it, though they don't use the tractor anymore. It sits locked in the barn, rust spreading across its hood, though some say they still hear it running on certain nights. Neighbors claim that if you follow the sound of the engine across the valley, you'll find tracks pressed into the earth. Tracks that lead not through the fields, but straight toward the nearest house. And some say, if you wait long enough, you'll see the driver. A figure caked in mud, hands gripping the wheel, waiting for his chance to finish the harvest he never left behind. The Whitmore farm was one of the oldest in the valley. People came from miles away every autumn to buy apples from its sprawling orchard, and they swore no fruit tasted sweeter. The Whitmores thrived even when other farms struggled. Their trees never seemed to wither. Their harvests never failed. But prosperity came with rules. The orchard had 3 that were passed from father to son, mother to daughter. Never harvest after sundown. Never leave rotting fruit on the ground. And above all, if you see a crow in the orchard after dark, never ever go near it. Sam Whitmore grew up hearing these rules, but no one ever explained why. His grandfather would just say, "The trees remember," and change the subject. As a boy, Sam obeyed out of fear, but as a teenager, he grew restless. He hated superstitions. He wanted proof. And one autumn evening in 1988, when the orchard was heavy with fruit, he decided he'd had enough of old stories. That night, the sun had dipped low, the horizon glowing orange before fading to gray. The air was cool, carrying the damp smell of fallen leaves. Sam grabbed a basket and slipped into the orchard, ignoring the way the shadows stretched long across the rows. The orchard was different at night. By day it was warm and inviting, the air sweet with ripening apples. But after sundown, it seemed like another world entirely. The trunks rose like black pillars. The branches wove together above him like a cathedral roof, and the silence was so deep it pressed on his ears. He told himself it was just his imagination, just trees, just apples. Then came the first caw. Sam looked up. A single crow sat perched on the highest branch of the nearest tree, feathers gleaming faintly in the moonlight. It stared at him, head cocked unnaturally far to one side, eyes glinting with an eerie red hue. Sam frowned and threw a stick. "Shoo!" The crow didn't move. It cawed again, louder this time, and Sam flinched. But he bent and began picking apples anyway, tossing them into his basket. Only when he touched them did he notice something strange. They weren't bruised. They weren't spoiled. They were rotten, blackened through to the core, soft and oozing. When he dropped one, it split open, and instead of seeds, tiny black feathers spilled out, glistening wet in the lantern light. His stomach turned. The crow above screamed. More answered. Sam's blood ran cold as he lifted his lantern. The branches overhead were lined with crows now. Dozens of them, hundreds. All staring, all silent, except for the first one, the largest, its eyes burning faintly red. Sam stumbled backward, basket clattering to the ground. He turned toward the farmhouse, but his throat tightened with dread. The orchard had changed. The rows stretched longer, twisting unnaturally, closing in on themselves. No matter which way he looked, the paths were endless, the trunks leaning like sentinels. It was as though the orchard had swallowed him whole. Then came the sound. Thump, thump, thump. Not footsteps, something deeper, heavier. The trees were moving. Sam spun, his lantern swinging wildly. He saw it clearly, the trunk of an apple tree bending, roots tearing free of the soil, dragging forward like gnarled legs. Its branches reached down, twisting like skeletal arms. Apples burst from the impact, spilling to the ground like wet, red organs. And on the highest branch sat the first crow, watching, always watching. Sam bolted, running blindly through the orchard. Branches tore his skin, roots clawed at his legs. The crows exploded into flight around him, wings beating the air like a storm. Their feathers brushed his face, their cries deafening. He tripped and fell, smashing onto a pile of apples that squashed beneath him. The stench was overwhelming, sweet rot, iron, and something worse. He looked down. The apples weren't fruit anymore. They pulsed, beat, as though alive. And inside the torn flesh of one, he saw a human eye staring back at him. Sam screamed and scrambled backward. That was when he saw it. The crow had landed, but it was no longer just a crow. It stood taller than a man, its wings stretching wide enough to blot out the moonlight. Its feathers dripped black liquid that hissed as it hit the ground. Its beak was jagged, sharp, and glistening like steel. And its eyes, twin burning coals, locked onto his. The voice came not from its beak but from everywhere, from the branches, from the soil, from the very air around him. "Leave!" it rasped, deep and ancient. "This is not yours." Sam bolted again, running without thought, without direction. His chest burned, his legs screamed, but he didn't stop until he burst from the orchard, collapsing in the yard just steps from the porch. His father rushed out with a lantern, pulling him inside as Sam babbled incoherently about crows, trees, and eyes and apples. William Whitmore stormed into the orchard with the shotgun, but when he entered, it was silent. The trees swayed gently in the night air. No crows, no movement, just a scattering of apples on the ground. By dawn, the orchard looked as normal as ever, but near the edge, William found something that made his blood run cold. Dozens of apples split open in the dirt, and in every one, instead of seeds, were small black feathers slick with blood. Sam never entered the orchard again. He refused to go near it, refused even to eat the fruit. The Whitmores never broke the rules after that. They harvested only by day. They cleared every rotten apple, and they never ever looked for crows after dark. But neighbors whisper that the Whitmore orchard is cursed. Some say they've seen a lone crow perched on the highest branch at night, its eyes glowing red, staring at the farmhouse. Others claim the wind in the orchard sometimes sounds like words, low, drawn out, almost human. And if you dare to stand in those rows past midnight, you might hear the trees whisper the same warning Sam did that night. This is not yours. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Nightfear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.